Yes, this phrase, the information war, you hear it on the lips of so many Ukrainians, both in the civil sector and the military of all ranks. Ukrainians very well aware that they are not just fighting a military war, they're fighting a political and a propaganda one. So we wanted to test the information coming out from the Ukrainian side about the territorial gains they've made on what we're calling the Mykolaiv front down here in the south of the country. Because if we could test and see with our own eyes the evidence of the ground that they've taken from the Russian army, if that stands up, it would represent some of the most significant territorial gains that the Ukrainian army has made here since they were invaded.
It is the human cost, lives uprooted. They reached the Ukrainian forward positions from no man's land, escaping Russian-occupied Kherson. Their only protection, white rags hanging from the vehicles.
They checked all our cars, our clothes, our bags and our phones. But apart from that, it was okay.
They're telling people to stay inside.
Another, safely in Moldova, filmed Russian armour on Kherson's streets and will not forget life under occupation.
But there is a heavy movement every night. You see tanks on the street, you see infantry units moving, you see artillery units moving. I don't know where they're going, but heavy movement at the nights. You hear the planes low flying. You hear the missiles just passing over your head.
Ukrainian armour is on the move in the city, in the countryside, probing attacks and defending established lines.
How far are we from the Russian position?
Less than 3 kilometers.
Right. So,
And they come in here. Sometimes come here and something push back.
right, right. So is this front line advancing or retreating or staying the same?
Ця лінія, вона рухається вперед, назад. Here is standing here.
We're now inside the Kherson municipal region itself, about 3 kilometers from the Russian positions in that direction. And this whole area has been fought over repeatedly. Lives have gone, houses have gone, and here the technical college in this small town has also been obliterated.
Elsewhere on the front, Ukrainian soldiers film themselves marching forward towards Kherson. We're going to push these idiots back, he says. Aside from the fog of war propaganda from both sides, evidence and facts firsthand. Strewn around the countryside near Mykolaiv, what the Russian tank crews left behind. Rocket-propelled grenade boosters. Rations stating Russian army. Clothing. And tellingly, the craters of incoming fire. This, perhaps the furthest west President Putin's special operation, specially operated, before retreat.
My son's house on the upper street was totally destroyed. The place was brand new.
Katerina Prihorovska recalls the recent Russian assault on her village, Burivka. Up the road in Novo-Odessa, the Second World War monument points west to yesterday's aggression, not east to today's occupation. At the town hall, the mayor sets out how life was under recent Russian siege. Listing villages nearby which were occupied by the Russians for around a week.
The occupiers were shooting at the road, at civilian cars. One of our residents was killed by this shooting.
Images filmed by the mayor show Russian army vehicles abandoned, captured, or destroyed.
Faced with the Russian assault from the south through the east to the north behind me, the people of Novo-Odessa did the reasonable thing and detonated the bridge, depriving the Russians of a road route south to the town. Now, ultimately, the rout of the Russian forces here was notably successful, but it was not without cost.
He also filmed the wreckage of a Ukrainian helicopter. He said it had been shot down. The images include the bodies of 3 crew. The evidence on the battlefield then unequivocal here. The Ukrainian army is advancing. But armor still rolls through the streets of Mykolaiv city by day. By night, curfew, virtual blackout, and the air raid sirens.
Alex Thompson reporting. Now, on the other side of Kherson is the city of Melitopol. It was taken in the early days of the war as the Russian forces from Crimea moved upwards towards Mariupol. A short while ago, I spoke to the mayor of the city. Now, he was abducted by Russian forces 17 days ago and then freed 5 days later. Images of Ivan Fedorov being marched out of offices by armed men with a bag over his head were caught on CCTV and broadcast around the world. It also sparked protests in the occupied city. So I started by asking him what had happened when he was taken.
Russia Federation don't agree with my position about Ukrainian Melitopol. They asked me to bring our citizens to Russia Federation and agitate them to invite to Russia Federation. But my position and position of our team that Melitopol is Ukrainian city, that Ukrainian democratic European city. That's why Russia Federation wants to make something hot, and they find such realization as kidnapped me. And of course, I think you saw that our civilian citizens become to meetings. It was civilian meetings, and of course, Russia Federation said me, stop this meeting. I answered that I can't do it because I didn't organize this meeting, and I can't stop this meeting. That's why they kidnapped me, and they think that this position will solve all their problems.
And what did they say to you when you were in their custody?
They said that I must go out from my position as city mayor, and I must choose another vice mayors, and of course I must keep silent, and then with me will be everything okay.
What did you say back?
I said that they stupid. They ask me not legal things, and it is don't solve all their problems. Only more and more problems they will. More and more problems will come for them with my kidnapped.
The Russians say that they have people in Ukraine who support them, who want to be Russian. Is that true in your city?
Of course, it's true. Maybe 5% of citizens want to live in Russia Federation, but we have a good case for them. They can take their bags and go to Russia.
And what do you think will happen now?
Now in Melitopol, we have humanitarian catastrophe because there is no food in markets, there is no cash in ATM, there is no fuel, there is no pharmacy. Last 2 days, they blocked and closed cell phones, network, internet. They make such information blockades in Melitopol. And it's a very dangerous situation because citizens can't call emergency systems. It's not possible to live in our city now.
If Russia says it wants Melitopol to stay Russian as a condition for peace, what will the people there do?
It's not possible. Melitopol is Ukrainian city with Ukrainian citizens, and you must think Ukrainian citizens in Melitopol come to civilian meetings when Russian soldiers was around. It was very dangerous, but they come to street and say, go out from our city.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, too.
Well, as new face-to-face peace talks are due to begin this week in Turkey, there's been no let-up in the fighting for the people across this country, sheltering in basements and subway stations. The mayor of Irpin, a town just northwest of Kiev, that has seen heavy fighting and intense Russian bombardment, said today Ukrainian forces had seized back control of the area. The strategically important city of Chernihiv in the north has continued to be hit with heavy Russian artillery, and the port of Mariupol in the south is on the brink of Russian control after weeks of heavy bombardment and street-to-street fighting. A warning, my report contains images you may find disturbing. In Mariupol, stepping into the light is a terrifying experience. When the shelling and missiles are somewhere else for a moment, you can take in just what has happened here. When you realise how many people have fled their homes, and yet how many like you are still there. When home is destroyed and the only way to cook is on an open fire, you can take in what happened to another person who dared to be outside. Valentina is 70 years old. She's lived in Mariupol her whole life, and now almost everything is gone. A message on the mirror to anyone looking for her says, "I'm in the basement." The local reporter who keeps us updated on Mariupol is Artem Popov.
Russian troops today control about 50% of the city. They entrenched themselves in the west and east. The invaders continue to move to the city center. Fighting is going on the central streets of Mariupol today.
In those Russian-controlled parts, there were remarkable scenes. As they raised the flag in Ukraine, it's worth recalling that the music of what is now the Russian national anthem was first that of the Soviet Union. The propaganda footage filmed by a Russian journalist shows what are purported to be local people, apparently delighted. The Russians now appear to control the area around the theatre, where Ukrainians claimed the bombing was a war crime, killing around 300 people, many of them children. So expect a new Russian counter-narrative soon. In the places Russia is taking, it needs the population to accept, if not embrace them. But day after day in Kherson, occupied since the first week, people have protested and there have been reports of arrests and disappearances. In Lviv, we met Artem, who had just escaped. He told of seeing his family's neighbours taken away by Russian forces.
В наш двір приїжджала команда російських спецпризначенців, і вони вломлювалися до мого сусіда по дому. І був ще один варіант у моєї сусідки, етажем знизу приїжджали і забирали двох хлопців і одну дівчину з пакетами на голові. І зараз ніхто не знає про їхню долю, що з ними сталося.
There are Ukrainian fears that Russia is giving Chernihiv in the north the same treatment as Mariupol. The mayor sent Channel 4 News this footage showing the scale of destruction and mass graves being dug for the dead. Here, at least, they still have coffins.
Ми сьогодні працюємо, як і вчора. Ситуація у нас майже без змін. Ворог продовжує гатити по місту Чернігова.
The attacks on Chernihiv were what the Russians were boasting about today, claiming to have shot down 4 Ukrainian jets over the city. But no explanation of why, when they say they're focused on Donbass in the east, they are still attacking the north. Well, while fighting continues across the country, a new round of talks are due to begin in Turkey between Ukraine and Russia. So how will the current balance of power on the battlefield be likely to influence those talks? Before the invasion, Russia controlled Crimea after invading it 8 years ago and supported 2 pro-Russian breakaway republics in Luhansk and Donetsk. Since February 24th, it's pushed out from those 2 areas, seeking to win a land corridor to link them with Crimea, with the destructive battle to seize Mariupol critical to that task. At the same time, Russian advances into the north of the country have fallen short of Kiev and Kharkiv, with the Ukrainians saying they have counterattacked around the capital. Ukraine believes Russia is trying to regroup after a series of damaging supply problems, even pulling some forces back into Belarus. But could Putin now press a peace deal, despite what's happened in the north, which enables him to claim success and recognition in taking the east and south? Last night, President Zelensky said he might accept Ukrainian neutrality and committing to being a non-nuclear power. He even ruled out trying to liberate the whole of his country.
Я понимаю, что освободить полностью территорию, заставить Россию невозможно. Это приведет к Третьей мировой войне. Я прекрасно все понимаю и отдаю себе отчет. Поэтому я и говорю, это компромисс, да, компромисс. Вернитесь туда, с чего все началось, и там попытаемся решить вопрос Донбасса. Сложный вопрос Донбасса.
But that won't be the only complex issue to resolve. Ukraine won't accept full demilitarization of the country, and that's a key Russian aim at the start of the war. Ukraine wants any agreement to be guaranteed by third parties, but who would be acceptable to both sides? And President Zelensky says any final deal would have to be put to a referendum, and who knows if the Ukrainian people are in any mood to accept a compromise with Russia after a month of destruction. Well, we'll discuss all of that in a moment, but first there are conflicting claims tonight over whether the now sanctioned Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich and Ukrainian peace negotiators have suffered poisoning symptoms. The Russian oligarch is reported by some sources to have accepted a Ukrainian request to help negotiate an end to the Russian invasion. Our reporter Porrick O'Brien is in the newsroom. Porrick.
Krish, this is based on work done by Bellingcat, the collective of open source journalists. Some background quickly, first of all. Roman Abramovich has been involved in a series of peace talks to try to bring the war in Ukraine to an end, it transpires. He is uniquely placed to do that, of course. He has the ear, on the one hand, of Vladimir Putin, he himself, as you said, sanctioned by the UK and EU, Abramovich, that is. On the other hand, he's also well connected in Ukraine. So, according to Bellingcat, on the 3rd of March, Abramovich was in Kiev with another Russian businessman and a Ukrainian MP engaged in these peace talks. The talks went on late into the night, and about at 10 p.m. on March the 3rd, they went back to an apartment in central Kiev. Throughout the course of that night, it transpires that they started to develop symptoms. They had inflammation of the skin, they had piercing pains in their eyes. They reached out to Bellingcat, who helped them source an expert. They were tested. According to that expert, the symptoms were consistent with poisoning. The expert also concluded, though, that the degree of toxin was not to the level that was life-threatening, but Team Abramovich interpreted this as hardliners in the Kremlin trying to send them a message, trying to in some way sabotage peace talks. Now, so far, we haven't had a response from the Kremlin to these claims, although, interestingly, we have heard from one of Zelensky's top advisors in the last few hours who has attempted to pour cold water on this story, has tried to dampen down the effects of it. We've heard from him just in the last few hours.
Porrick O'Brien. Well, joining me now is Andrei Zagorodnyuk, the former Ukrainian defence minister. Good evening and thank you for joining us. How hopeful are you about this week's talks in Turkey?
Not too much, to be honest, because we don't see a real intention from Putin to actually address that whole issue. He is still killing people. He's still trying to advance. They're still claiming that, they will take part of Ukrainian territory, and they still need to demilitarize Ukraine, like seriously. Like during that war, they think that we would go for demilitarization. I mean, so at the moment, that I don't think they're still comprehending the situation on the ground. That they actually cannot achieve any operational objectives. So, which means most likely these negotiations are not going to end with anything. But importantly, that he keeps the door open for negotiations, and most likely they will get into that door as soon as they see that they're actually failing and they cannot do anything about that. So So we may see some difference in the future when they finally realize that their ground campaign is actually stumbling.
Because President Zelensky has said two key things about those talks. The first is that he's open to the question of neutrality, which we've heard before. But the other interesting line that he came out with in interviews this week was that he is prepared to compromise on contested areas of territory. Does that mean that he could potentially let Russia keep the Donbass?
Well, let me remind you that the compromise on this, I wouldn't call them contested territory, because when some country occupies the other one, and you don't call it contested territory, you call it occupied territory. But nevertheless, so the compromise on that was tried to be found 8 years ago during the so-called Minsk process. And during that period of time, there were already some compromises. There were some kind of, discussions about the of sort of special status. And as we can see, they didn't lead to anything. So I'm sure that Zelensky is happy to find some solution, and he's happy to try, because he does want the peace. That's absolutely clear. But honestly speaking, there's not much hope at this stage where the Russia is, and how hard they can still try to achieve at least something, that they will actually do anything like that. Most likely they will go for the real negotiations. They will actually start real negotiations when they understand that they don't have many other options.
I mean, Russia is very close to having Mariupol now. If they get that, can you see a final status after this war in which Russia does have access to Crimea over land?
Technically, it would be very difficult for them to control. So one thing is to invade the territory and put some troops there. The other situation is to control it. There is no loyal population in those areas to Russians. Russians killed so many people that people just hate them there. There is no misunderstanding who did that. There is no misunderstanding that this was like unsubstantiated attack, which means that we gave no reason for Russia to even start any sort of operation. Not talking about operation of that type of brutality and that extent of atrocities and so on. So holding those territories, it would be extremely difficult. So I don't think that that would be something really realistically achievable for them. For Ukraine to agree that Russia owns it, we in fact would reward the aggressor. We in fact would concede to the aggressor, and by that would reinforce its further attacks on Ukraine. So it's actually a bit illogical. And also, in a modern world, especially in Europe particularly, you don't want the peace which is reached through the war, through the destruction, and then think that this is okay. This is this is something we can live with. That's not the world which we would like to live in, to be honest, and nowhere. That's not the peace deals which we need to see, because this is not peace deals. These are something totally different and not acceptable.
And very briefly, do you believe this stuff about Roman Abramovich?
Oh, honestly, I don't know. It's some sort of conspiracy theories and some kind of stories which we just learned about today. Perhaps there are some negotiators which are trying to help, but honestly, there's just one person who decides everything in Russia, and that's not Roman Abramovich. This is Vladimir Putin. This is a person who is already a war criminal by far, and only he decides whether he wants to stop the war or not. So let's not think that there is some sort of objective truth, which some people can find it. It's one guy who decided that sovereign nations should stop existing. So that's it. That's what the reason for this war.
Mr. Zagorodny, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, with me now is the retired colonel and former defense advisor to Ukraine, Liam Collins, who helped train and reform Ukraine's military between 2016 and 2018. So perhaps you're not as surprised as everybody else at how well Ukrainian forces are doing.
No, absolutely not. I mean, if anybody has been over there and seen the Ukrainians perform over the last 6 years in training, I mean, they made a committed effort to reform their defense establishment starting in 2016. And so they made a lot of reforms, not all of them they want to make. So that internal commitment to reform the defense establishment, Western aid in terms of training and advisory assistance and weaponry, as well as a culture of volunteerism and then a culture of disciplined initiative at the lower level, empowering lower level leaders to seize the initiative on the battlefield. Those things together, you know, I'm not surprised at all. I mean, they're going to outperform Russia at the tactical level every time.
Well, just break that down for us a little, if you will. I mean, how significant has the foreign aid, the American aid in particular, been?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, I mean, the aid has been significant. Again, I mean, some of it is the Ukrainians themselves, but they're dependent on that aid. They don't have enough weaponry and ammunition for the types of engagement that they're having. So they need that support. And so the Javelin weapon systems, for example, the anti-tank weapon systems, when Russia sent T-92 tanks across the border in 2014 to support separatists, albeit at a much smaller level than what they're doing now, they were pretty much impenetrable against what the Ukraine had. So now as in other anti-tank missiles, they're able to take out a lot more armored vehicles than they would have otherwise been able to.
Do you think with everything that they are getting now, they have the ability to actually push Russian forces back, perhaps even push them out?
It's going to be a long fight. I mean, they're facing an overwhelming military still, right? They're being smart and selective about where they conduct these counterattacks. They're going to do it at a time and place it to their tactical advantage. And so they're going to have these gains and potentially push them back. But it's, again, they're facing an overwhelming combat power. So it will take a long time and a lot more reinforcements in terms of weaponry from the West to allow them to do that.
Militarily, I mean, Russia has said that they're focusing on Donbass. So what are they doing in the north?
Yeah, I mean, that's just Russian rhetoric. The invasion hasn't gone as planned. And so they're just going to, you know, make up a rhetoric that isn't even truthful to tell their own people to try to convince them that they're having success when they're actually not having success at all in Ukraine. And it's not going as expected. And they've lost a lot of, you know, a significant portion of their military. And a lot of, unfortunately, Russian soldiers are being sent home in body bags to their families. So it's not going well. So you can't believe what he's saying. He's just, it's rhetoric for the internal consumption of the Russian population.
And if they are sending their forces back into Belarus, what do you think they're doing? Are they regrouping, ready to come back, or move them somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Russia, right, the initial invasion didn't go as planned. They've kind of culminated, and they're really at a stalemate at this point. They're trying to build up combat power, but it's going to be difficult to do. And eventually, if they're forced to go into the city, if Putin forces them to go into Kyiv, forces them to go into Kharkiv, then they're just going to, in addition to facing the Ukrainian armed forces, they're going to face tens of thousands of volunteers. They're going to fight as guerrillas, and it's going to be a brutal urban fight. And they're leaving their relatively protected positions on the outside of towns where they're just launching artillery, and then they'll expose themselves as they go into the cities. And so I think it would be a disaster for the Russians.
Liam Collins, thank you very much indeed.